In a world where freedom is a distant dream and hope is a dangerous illusion, one woman stands defiant. Welcome to the Trilogy of Jessica Bauer. In Chapter 1, we journey into the shadows where Jessica fights for survival and clings to her last shred of dignity. Will she find a way out, or will the darkness consume her? Let's begin. Jessica Bauer took a step back to avoid the door slamming on her nose. She heard Rex laughing. She could feel an old wound burning. It was the ghost of a searing pain, the only souvenir of the last time she had tried to leave that life behind. The freedom that had been promised with the rise of the Elective never extended to people like her. In fact, she felt more trapped now than ever. She had been one of Rex's girls for a long time now. She was used to being told the names of her customers. If they were important, the man himself came to break the news and tell her to behave. This time her eyes had gone wide, and she had to fight the urge to throw up. She had merely nodded. But once Rex had left the room, she had emptied her stomach in her chamber pot, or whatever they called it. After she was done, she had thoroughly washed her mouth and face. Staring into the mirror above the rickety table that served as a vanity, she wondered what she looked like to others. She had been called pretty, beautiful even, and often spirited. But once that last word was used, she always knew she would have a rough night. There was something about the attack that made men want to snuff out any light or crush any remnant of hope. She could remember those countless eyes staring with relish as they beat her into submission. At first, she would fight back, but she had soon learned that those men got off on crushing women, and it was better for her own survival to just let it go. She frowned at her mirror. She didn't have time for this. Soon enough, they would be here to take her to her new client. She had no choice. She sighed as she got up and reminded herself that she was lucky. She had managed to stay away from heroin and any other drugs. She knew many girls used them to get through the day and nights, but Jessie had found another drug that served the same purpose: numbness. She stripped off the dress she was wearing and began to wash herself. She hated the scented oil she had to smear on her body. She longed to be in her own home and use their homemade soap that smelled of flowers and sun. It seemed so far away that sometimes it felt like an illusion. Jenny had given her a dark blue slip dress. It clung to her curves, or whatever was left of them. She hardly ate, and yet she had still developed into a woman. Nobody from her past would recognize her, not even Adrian. She turned around and tried to glance over her shoulder to see her reflection in the mirror. There was no way to hide the whip marks that would never fade. She could still remember when it happened. It was the last time she had tried to run away. Rex had whipped her himself. Her scars were barely visible, but she knew what they meant. And quite often they gave creative ideas to her customers. They would be taking her to the military base, as it was out of the question that her new client left his city. Bile rose to her mouth, but she took a deep breath. She couldn't run away from it, and it would be better to get on with it. Once she had realized that there would be no going home, she had learned to protect herself. All the armor she could afford was lipstick and mascara, a few spritzes of a cheap perfume, and she was Jenny. She never gave them her name. It was the last thing that she still had. I am Jessica Bauer, Jessie, she thought to herself. She had long lost hope of ever seeing her family. How would they ever find her or even take her out of this house? Her father was no warrior, nor was anyone around them. Hope was something she had to let go. What she clung to was survival. There was no hope of being free, but she would survive it no matter what. She scrunched her nose. Her thoughts were becoming too dark and introspective. She didn't have this luxury because tonight she was going to lose the last remnant of dignity. Tonight, she was going to please the never-satisfied General Theodore Waters. Her hair cascaded over her shoulders. A few strokes of a brush were enough to make it shine. Jessie was almost ready, but there were still a few minutes before they came to get her. She sat on a chair and closed her eyes. Willing all thoughts about herself to recede, she locked Jessie Bauer deep within her. Feelings and thoughts were weakness. She would need all her strength tonight. The journey to Columbus wasn't as long as she hoped it would be. She peered from the window of the carriage and was amazed at the bustling activity around her. She had barely strayed away from the village when she was snatched. It was too painful to remember the particulars, but before her capture, life had seemed so full of sunlight and laughter. Her father and Maisie had told her countless times that the world beyond their community was dangerous and wild. But the need to know more and discover new experiences had pushed her to wander off. Her wanderlust had died long ago, but she admitted that she was curious about this city. It was the first time since the attack that had threatened to destroy the world that she was seeing one. They halted, and her hands tightened around her little handbag. She got out and followed Rex's man. Her thoughts were carefully tucked back into that corner of her mind. She was searched thoroughly. Clothes, shoes, personal belongings, and even her hair were potentially dangerous. It should have felt violating, but she was beyond that. With a dazed expression, she beheld the smooth interior and long hallways. Although profuse military personnel were walking about, it felt cozy. A guard walked her through a long corridor and opened a heavy door. She noticed right away the huge bed and couldn't take her eyes away from it. The man ruefully handed her a glass of something strong. "General Waters will be here soon," he said. She nodded and waited until he left the room to explore. She was standing by the window next to a nicely stocked bar. She was used to seeing a lot of booze and recreational substances at Rex's, but this was something else. Across the bed, there was a fireplace with 2 armchairs and a slouchy sofa, but Jessie didn't want to sit. She wasn't scared, but her body was stiff. She tiptoed to the wide windows. It was fascinating to see something else besides the wilderness that surrounded her home. Everything was so new and vibrant that she couldn't stop herself from breaking out of her numbness. There was no use in chiding herself. A thrill of excitement was coursing through her veins and making her quiver. The door creaked. A few steps, she could sense the determined presence behind her. She turned her head slowly and felt betrayed by the first thought that strayed in her mind. Fuck. He's hot. With a glance, Theodore Waters seized the girl in front of him. Rex always sent him the best. The only rule was to choose willing girls. He had broken all rules of morality, but there was one he refused to cross. She looked defiant, and yet she surprised him when she spoke with a witty tone. "Took you long enough." A slow, feral smile spread on his lips. "Feisty Jenny, that's your name, right?" She nodded slowly, trying to keep a coy smile on. Waters filled a glass of bourbon and filled another glass for her, but as he handed her the glass, he added, "See, I don't think it's your name." Her face fell, and his smile grew wider. Her eyes drifted away from Theodore Waters' burning gaze as her thoughts rambled. "You can call me Jennifer if you prefer," she muttered in a petulant tone. Someone knocked at the door and he sighed. He took her arm and led her to the fireplace. "Wait here." Gingerly, she sat on the edge of the black leather armchair. She had purposefully avoided the sofa where he would be able to sit next to her. She could hear him snapping at someone as she tried to think of a way to quicken the pace of this whole ordeal. The sooner it was over, the sooner she could go back to her own bed. She was hoping he was the type to fall asleep right after coitus, as, unfortunately, she had been ordered for the whole night. The other girls had given her conflicting accounts of Theodore Waters. He was gentle. He was rough. He was kind and chatty. He was cruel and cold. That left her with no idea about which one was here tonight and thus with no tracks to follow. She got up and chose instead the sofa. She decided to follow her usual strategy. It was no different than any other encounter. All men were fundamentally the same. Now that he was out of her sight, she could be reasonable and efficient. The girls often said that she was good. It had taken her years to mold herself into the perfect lady of pleasure. She wasn't sure her parents would be proud of her achievement, but her mother was gone, and her father... She gulped and took another sip of her drink. Time and place. She was here to work. She shouldn't lull herself into the comfort of the leather brushing against her bare legs, or the warmth of the fire, and even less with the effect of his gaze on her skin. She heard the door, and Waters walking to the bar. As he poured himself a drink, the brave and tough Jessica Bauer gave herself a last order before she receded back into her numbness. Be charming for goodness sake, and get this over with. Feeling him approach, she slowly uncrossed her legs and raised her eyes to appraise him. "Rough day?" "Rough year, so where were we?" He sat next to her, his body barely brushing hers. "You were trying to convince me that your name is Jennifer. Sorry to break it to you, but my shit detector is blinking. Who cares about my name?" She smiled and brushed her hair away from her cleavage, but his gaze didn't waver from hers. His were so blue that it hurt her teeth. She was starting to feel more annoyed than charming. Why was he making this so difficult? It was humiliating enough. And yet, it was delicious to banter with him. This is a customer, not a lover, she reminded herself. The last time she had been so frazzled was with a man called Stan. She had been his first, and something about his sweetness had made her melt, but he had betrayed her. She was a creature of the underworld. All she could do was survive. Her smile didn't falter, but he could see the annoyance in her eyes. It was actually amusing to see her trying hard to play her role. It was a delightful diversion from his shitty day. He had just received the report that Timothy Bauer had been found but had been wounded in the process. Another piece of news had riled him to the core. There were rumors that Thomas had been seen with his nephew Adrian tracking down the convoy. His attention was so focused on this new piece on the board that he barely noticed the girl's attempts at seducing him. What he needed tonight wasn't to lose himself in a sexual escapade, but rather forget about those dark thoughts gnawing at him. The chase was far more distracting and exciting than a quick tumble in the sheets. "You seem to forget who you're talking to." His words were clipped, his tone cold. She peered at him and shuddered. How many times had Rex reminded her of her place? This wasn't the place for a typical Jessie Bauer outburst. "Right," she nodded with a blank look, "but I'm not here to talk." She was a soldier. This was her battle. She had been through this game many times. She forced herself to place her hand on his knuckles. He flinched ever so slightly. She barely felt the tremor. She scrambled closer and tilted her face towards him. His eyes followed her movement, making her body squirm under his blue eyes. She rarely felt anything with her other customers but his eyes. His eyes. Her other hand reached for his cheek. Her lips barely brushed his, and she was pulled onto his lap as he ravenously kissed her back. This was General Theodore Waters. His name was enough to evoke the darkness that was left in his trail. Jessie kissed him back. Her body was starving for the right touch. But before they could proceed further, he pushed her back to her seat. Breathlessly, Jessie reached for him, but he shoved her back. "What the hell?" she huffed. He laughed, making her anger bubble up. "Listen, I'm not here to—" "No, you listen. You are here to please me," he replied implacably. The truth was that she was amusing him. It had been a while since he had wanted to talk to a girl rather than shut her up with his mouth. He wasn't really bothered by her anonymity. They were not here to be friends. But her denial said probably more than she thought. He was intrigued, and his paranoia was gnawing at the back of his head. Jessica was exasperated. The rise and fall of her emotions had already left her mentally exhausted, but the confusing manner in which he was acting was more than she could bear. "I guess the rumors are true. You might have a big army, but the rest is, well, beyond adequate." She snickered. The words had barely passed her lips, and she was mortified. What had she done? His smile vanished. His manhood wasn't threatened by those rumors, but she was grating his already dark mood. Waters straightened up. "Say it again and you'll be sorry." She bit her lips and folded her hands on her lap. She was losing the battle between the subservience beaten into her and her very own spark. Every time she lost it, she had to pay the price. Right beneath her joined hands and the thin material of her dress, there was that ugly scar on her left thigh. It was like a brand that reminded her of the night Rex had taught her that she was nobody and that she had nothing. What was left? Her life? And what a life it was. "Why? Are you hard of hearing, or do people actually obey you?" She smirked and stared back at Theodore Waters. Her back was straight, her head high. His hands encircled her knuckles as he leaned towards her. "What are you? Suicidal?" "Maybe." He was staring into her eyes. They weren't the eyes of a man trying to seduce a woman. It was the gaze of a killer who didn't even flinch when he pulled the trigger. Yes, he didn't rape, but he killed, destroyed, and tortured. He was General Theodore Waters. And this little slip of a girl was spitting on him as if he were just a boy. He hadn't signed up for this. Willing girls, yes. No Spitfire shield maidens. His hands tightened around her wrists. They would bruise, Jessie thought idly. But suddenly his grip loosened, and he got up. She had expected him to snap and kill her. She had wanted it. Escaping. How the hell could she ever do this? And where would she go? No, death was the only answer, and he would be the perfect one to bestow it on her. In spite of herself, her eyes teared up, and she was glad his back was turned to her. Quickly, she wiped them, hoping her makeup wasn't smudged. He was looking out of the window with yet another filled glass in his hand. She was wondering whether she should mix herself a drink or just ignore her burning throat when he spoke again. "I just found out he's coming after me. I still don't understand why he wants to kill me. Why would Thomas turn on me?" His tone was monotonous, as if he was speaking to a therapist rather than a prostitute. Jessie wondered if he had lost his mind. Wasn't he a feared dictator? Thomas Bauer was the last person she wanted to hear about. "Maybe you bored him into murder with your constant whining," she snapped, knowing she shouldn't have said that. He turned around, and she was surprised to notice the hint of tears pooling in his eyes. "You're lucky I can't decide if I want to slash your head off or toss you out on your ass." She got up and went to pour herself another drink. "All talk, no action." Her voice was nonchalant. The glass had barely reached her lips when she felt a blade against her neck. Her eyes went wide. "You are nothing but trouble." His face was bare of any emotions as the blade scraped her skin. "Just do it," she hissed. Thank you for joining us on this journey into Jessica Bauer's world. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where the stakes get higher and the battle for survival intensifies. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more of Jessica's story to life. Until next time, stay strong and keep fighting.